Alright, so let's look at some of these lights. First off, we're going to look at the GeoSun here. So we have the sun up, and this scene, when lit and rendered, is actually a nighttime scene. I'll turn the lights on in the viewport here so you can see a little bit of it. Um, so this is a nighttime scene, but I still have this V-Ray sun and sky. Though I'm not using the sky, I'll get to that in a minute. But as you can see, I have adjusted the filter color and some of the other settings here, most notably the color, so that the sun actually, instead of creating a daylight color, it's creating a uh, blue color to mimic what might look like moonlight or starlight. So that's using the sun to create what is essentially, in effect, the moon. Um, and by using this, we can get a good effect because it will still fill the entire scene with light. It will still have directional light effect as if it was the sun and sky, um, and that will give us a good full base lighting while still being a nighttime scene, or at least looking like a nighttime scene, even though it's not. Uh, I'm not using the sky, of course, though. It's on, but the only background image you'll see in any renders is actually this V-Ray dome light. And in this dome light, I put a texture in here. That's a starry sky, and so that is the background you will see is the starry sky from this dome light. And the dome light, of course, does also provide some more light to help illuminate the scene, and it provides that image-based lighting from the star map that I have on it. So that is another layer of lighting that's on the scene. Even with that, though, the scene was still a little bit dark, and you couldn't see, most notably, the underside of the plane. Anything coming from this direction was a little bit too dark because both of our lights are skybound, so they're looking down. So that is what these big, huge rectangular lights are for. They're all, as you can see, they're blue to still maintain that nighttime or moonlight effect. Um, and there's three of them here, all angled upwards to illuminate the bottom of the aircraft. And I'll see if I can throw on a quick render here. Might take a second, but we'll look at it anyway. Um, and I'll continue talking about some of the lights while we wait for that to pop up. So I've got these big rectangle lights, and they're just illuminating the aircraft. You don't need to make anything big. Um, don't need to illuminate the entire scene if we're just going to be focusing on the aircraft for a moment. And there it is. Coming in now in the render view here, you can see some of the effect. Of course, these lights are invisible. That turns on. Where is it? There it is. I have invisible check so that you don't get these big, huge squares. Actually, in the render, as you can see, they're not there, though they are still providing light to the bottom of the aircraft so that you can see the entire model. Alright, I skipped around a little bit and waited for this image here to finish rendering so that we can look at it. And as you can see, there is a texture on the aircraft, and that's in here. I have it turned off in the viewport because I'll talk about that in a moment when we go over to Substance Painter. But as you can see, there's the sky background, and the aircraft is illuminated. You can see it, though it appears to still be a nighttime scene. Now, when we talk about the cockpit lights here, which I'll get to right now, um, that is important because we have the V-ray sun, we have the dome light, we have these rectangular lights. This scene is not actually dark. It may appear to be a nighttime scene, but the scene is not actually dark. That's very important for these interior cockpit lights because they're not actually illuminating anything. Uh, as you can see here, we've got this light illuminating the control panel and this light illuminating the gunner station behind the pilot seat here. These lights have insanely high intensity. As you can see, this one's at 300,000. And that is because, as I said, the scene is not actually dark. It only appears to be dark in the render because of the way we have the colors set for our environmental lights. So, in effect, what these lights are doing, they're not illuminating, they're merely overriding the blue color of the environmental lights, which is why they have to be so powerful. That's something to take note if you are going to be lighting a scene like this, because I had to do a lot of testing to figure out how powerful I needed to make these lights, and as you can see in the render, they don't look, they're not blown out as you would expect a light at 300,000 intensity to be. They're just because of how the react with the environmental lights, how they're overriding the color of both the dome HDRI and the V-ray sun, which are both default intensity. You could potentially turn the intensity of those down, and then you wouldn't have to set these lights as so powerful. But I didn't see a need for that because you'd have to turn those down to a level where these lights, where a more sane level became appropriate. But since it doesn't blow out the scene, it doesn't blow out the lights at all, I didn't bother with it. So we have those two cockpit lights. I also have a leading edge wing light here, one on each end. Those are just light, a green and a red light on each wing for the leading edge lights. And I have another light here on the tail. I'll pull it up here in the outliner so you can see it. There's the tail navigation light, right wing nav light, and the left wing nav light. Those don't show up very much in the render because there's not really anything for them to reflect on. You can see the tail light there. If there were environmental fog effects, rain or something like that, you'd be able to see those easier because there'd be something for them to actually reflect off of. But in this scene, they don't matter that much, though they show up here in the viewport because, again, their intensity is insanely high. But the viewport lighting is not a good representation of how your lights will actually be, at least in this setup. It's better in a more normal setup where you're not using a sun to play as the moon. But so that is the majority of the lighting here in our scene, and as you can see, it brings a very nice effect to the model, which you didn't get with just the flat gray with no lighting on it. You get a better feel for the shape and the shadows, how the aircraft responds to light, and it just shows off the model. It looks nice, and that's the whole purpose of lighting a scene like this. We're showing off the model, so it shows off the interior cockpit, shows off the textures inside the cockpit, as you can see there, shows off the windows and how things shine out and shine around, and it's just a good way of highlighting your model. And as you can see, it's not even that complicated. I only have a handful of lights in this scene, and most of them are environmental lights, which are big and easy to set up. So that is my simple light setup for this aircraft, and you could do any model with this. If you're doing a daylight scene, you wouldn't even need all of these lights. I probably wouldn't even have the dome light. I wouldn't have these big, huge rectangle lights. I might still have one or two of the rectangle lights on the side away from the sun, just to soften up shadows on the non-illuminated side of the aircraft. I might do that, it would depend. You could also fix that with global illumination, which we do have turned on, and I'll show you my settings here for that. Alright, okay. Global illumination is a really great tool for lighting, and I'll just bring up my settings here. I'm using the radiance map when I'm rendering. Light cache. I don't have reflective caustics on. Those are very expensive for rendering, and there's not really a worthwhile amount of them in this scene. So I've just left that turned off. The irradiance map is a good way, though if you have a very powerful machine, brute force also works, or if you have a lot of time. Everything else I've left pretty much default. You can change some of the advanced settings, but it's really not that necessary. You have your presets here if you're going to be, so you can get a very low, though I've found global illumination, since V-Ray is designed to work with global illumination, it doesn't actually add that much to the render time on its base settings, but you can adjust these to get a little bit faster for test renders and things like that. But even this only took a handful of minutes here, and that's at high, as you can see. So it's not that expensive just to turn global illumination on. My V-Ray render settings are also just about the same. I'm using progressive rendering instead of bucket. That's basically down to personal preference. So that's the lighting of this scene. Dome light, sun and sky, adjust the colors, use these to brighten up dark spots. Of course, these lights, I almost forgot to mention, these lights are not casting shadows. I have that turned off. Where is it? It's here somewhere. They don't cast shadows. Here we go. Yeah, shadows are turned off because we don't want them casting upward shadows, of course. The sun is the only thing we want really casting shadows. Though the interior lights do as well. Because they're powerful enough that they'd be casting shadows and overpowering the moonlight in this case. Alright, and with that, we'll move on to textures in just a moment. I'll turn them on here in the viewport so you can see, and there's the dome texture. And you can see it looks shiny in the viewport here. Obviously, it doesn't look like that in here. That's just an effect of the hypershade and materials and things. But I'll be right back, and we'll move this over to Substance Painter, and I will show you how to make those textures.